Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's SFIC weekly online briefing for faith leaders. Today's topic will center on shining a light on the Institute of Aging's Friendship Line and its efforts to combat loneliness and social isolation. Hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the Joint Information Center of the San Francisco COVID Command Center. Some housekeeping for today. Audio, video, and chat will be monitored and recorded for record keeping, training, and quality assurance. By default, all participants will be muted and video turned off to minimize distraction. To submit a question or comment, select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. They will be shared with speakers after the meeting for response. Thank you. San Francisco is still experiencing a dangerous COVID-19 surge. You can take the following actions in order to save lives. Stay home as much as you can. Do not gather with people from outside your household, whether indoors or outdoors. If you must go out, make sure to wear a mask. 1 in 3 people with COVID have no symptoms but can infect other people without knowing it. If you have been exposed to COVID-19 or have symptoms, follow guidelines about quarantining. Support is available by calling 628-217-6101 or by calling 311. Together, we will recover. Get tested, San Francisco. You can save lives and stop the spread of COVID-19 by getting tested through your healthcare provider. If you have symptoms or have been exposed to COVID-19 but don't have health insurance or can't get tested through your provider, visit sf.gov/gettestedSF or call 311 for information on getting tested at a city-run testing location. At this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Michael Pappas. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elisa, and thank you to the incredible team at the Joint Information Center's virtual outreach team. Good morning, I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this morning's online briefing for faith leaders. One of the most significant psychological and social effects of the coronavirus pandemic and its containment measures includes the disruption of social connections. At a time when we all need to be as resilient as we can, many have not had access to a key ingredient of resilience: in-person social support. Not surprisingly, many have reported feeling lonely and depressed during the pandemic. For over 45 years, the Institute on Aging's Friendship Line has been a vital lifeline for people aged 60 and older and adults living with disabilities, to connect with a caring, compassionate voice ready to listen and provide emotional support. As the nation's only accredited hotline of its kind, the need for this service has increased with the arrival of the COVID-19 and the host of emotional well-being issues related to social isolation. This week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center virtual outreach team, will shine a spotlight on this critical program whose reach has expanded statewide in an effort to respond to the pandemic. At this time, it gives me great pleasure, and it's a privilege to welcome the chairman of the board of the San Francisco Interfaith Council and the executive director of the Shanti project, my friend and colleague Kaushik Roy, to offer some words of welcome and read the interfaith statement.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning to everyone. On behalf of our board of directors, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us for our weekly conversation. We were actually speaking about this a few minutes ago, just how important conversations, even though if they're virtual, can be in our own efforts to try to stay connected with one another. And this weekend is going to mark 10 months since Mayor Breed had to first initiate the shelter in place. And during points of last year, Michael and I and others would talk about how we had to adjust our attitude as COVID reality set in, from being at a sprint to a marathon. And I'm not a runner, but a runner friend of mine told me there's actually ultra marathons, which are 50 to 100 miles at a time. And so I feel like now we've all had to go from a marathon to an ultra marathon, but it really is a testament to everyone's resilience and courage that we keep going every day with each other and on our own and fulfill our responsibilities. I want to give a special thanks to Michael and his partner in crime, Cynthia Zambucas. We only have 2 staff members who accomplish much more than much larger staffs at other places, and we're very fortunate, not just as the council, but as a city, to have the 2 of them. And I also want to give a special acknowledgement to our guests this morning in IOA. They are an amazing organization with such wonderful history and accomplishment. Just the other night, I was reading an article on Michael Phelps, the Olympic swimmer, and his very public battles with depression and suicide ideation. And in that article, it said that right now, 3 out of 10 Americans show signs of depression, which is more than 3 times the number before COVID. So I think this is a topic we should certainly talk more about in general, because it doesn't just affect clients of nonprofits, but affects every single one of us and our families. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, I want to give a special welcome to you. Thank you for being here. At the beginning of every Interfaith Council event or meeting, we do have an interfaith statement that we like to read. It's just a way to take a moment and remind ourselves why we've all gathered together. So I'll do that and we'll continue. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other, that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Good morning, everybody.
Thank you, Kaushik, and thank you for your leadership and commitment to this series. It's made a world of difference. Ministry takes many forms. I think sometimes when people think of ministry, they think of faith leaders in congregations. But I think in this instance, chaplaincy has been a critical ministry, a frontline ministry, and an essential ministry. We are very blessed to have with us today Rabbi Barney Brickner, the chaplain for the Institute on Aging, whom we are featuring today. We welcome Rabbi Barney, and we would ask him to lead us in this meditative and reflective moment.
Good morning, and thank you, Michael, for this wonderful invitation. Now I understand why I was invited to speak this morning. But I wanted to take this opportunity and share with you a teaching from rabbinic tradition. In the Mishnah, Pirkei Avot, sayings of the fathers, Rabbi Hillel is quoted as saying, "Do not separate yourself from the community." And centuries later, Sforno, the well-known Italian rabbinic scholar of the 15th century, would further add to what Hillel said. And he would say, do not separate yourself from the community when times are hard. Instead, share in its struggle. It's no coincidence that this sentence, this wording from Hillel is in the Mishnah, an early rabbinic text that elaborates on mitzvot, commandments, which are otherwise known as Jewish law. In other words, at least as I understand it, in Jewish life, it is more than a good deed. It is an obligation to interact and engage with, to reach out to others so that neither they nor we feel alone. It is just in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, from the very beginning of all things. We read, it is not good for Adam, or Adam Kadmon, humanity, to be alone. Connecting with others, building relationship, is the spiritual sustenance that is essential to nurture the soul. In the Jewish tradition, all important things are done in the company of others. we are required to make a minyan, a gathering of 10 or more adults, in order to recite certain prayers. On Shabbat, we have 2 loaves of bread on the table to recall both the commandments of remembering and observing the Sabbath. On Passover, we need the presence of family and friends around the Seder table to drink the required 4 cups of wine as we share the faith story of our people with each other. Learning is a communal activity. Based on the verse in Ecclesiastes that 2 are better than 1, we are taught from a very early age that we are to study in Chevruta style, in the style of partnerships. In every rabbinic tradition, in every generation, there's a scholarly zugot, a pairing. Yochanan ben Zakkai had Shimon ben Gamliel, and Rabban Gamliel II had Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanina. Rabbi Akiva had Rabban Gamliel, and Rabbi Chaya had Judah HaNasi, and Hillel had Shammai. In fact, the bond between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lachish was so strong that when Rabbi Yochanan learned that his friend had died, the isolation and loneliness it caused ultimately drove him insane. Iron sharpens iron, says the proverb, implying that just as when 2 pieces of iron are sharpened when rubbed against each other, there is a great benefit to one who conducts himself with love and friendship with other people. Sustainer of all life, Modim Anachnu, Adonai Eloheinu. As we awaken our awareness to the important work of the Friendship Line this morning, and how the work they do to bring hope to so many who are feeling so isolated and alone during this time, we are most grateful for this moment of connection. We are all keenly aware of the importance of our coming together in such fellowship, especially in times like these. Baruch atah Adonai, blessed are you, Adonai, who through love teaches us how to help heal the sick and bring companionship to the lonely. It is through great acts of compassion, in chesed, in loving kindness, that you sustain us. And for all this and more, we give you praise. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. How appropriate, and what a wonderful foundation and grounding for the conversation to come. A mantra I have invoked since the outset of the pandemic is to commend our faith leaders for cultivating community in the midst of isolation, but they can't do it alone. And this series is designed to provide resources for them. Today, we are very, very blessed to have with us Mia Grigg, who is the Senior Director at Integrated Behavioral Health for the Institute on Aging. She will share with us today the successes and the opportunities of the Friendship Line. And it is our hope that our faith leaders and congregation leaders will be able to take advantage of this and encourage their congregants to take advantage of this very, very important service, especially in the midst of this pandemic. Mia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And good morning to everybody. Thank you. So thank you for the introduction and the description of Friendship Line. As Michael said, we are a accredited 24-hour crisis line as well as a warm line. With those of you who don't understand the difference, crisis line is really to address suicide and suicide prevention and in the moment, and a warm line is really to connect with people. We serve older adults and anyone over 18 who identifies as having a disability, and there's no screening. You don't have to identify, you just need to call and reach out. We were founded in 1973 by Dr. Patrick Arbour, who has made loneliness and social isolation his life's work. We provide a caring ear, emotional support, and human connection. We also attempt to address the high suicide rate in the older adult population, and we see part of our job as suicide prevention. You'll see this quote on the screen: "Our connection to others is what binds us to life." That's a quote from Dr. Arbor, and it's become our motto for the Friendship Line, really understanding the impact of social connection on people's wellness, on people's health, on their life, on their willingness to keep going. We provide inbound calls 24 hours a day nationwide, and we provide outbound calls in our local counties, weekly or daily check-in calls, social connections, building relationships. Many of our callers and our staff and volunteers have become like family to each other and have been with us many, many years. Our staff are highly trained. We have a combination of staff and volunteers on the line, and they are all trained in topics such as elder abuse reporting, suicide risk assessment and safety planning, active listening, grief support, mental health, aging issues, dementias. And next slide, please. The COVID impact for Friendship Line was huge. I remember an emergency meeting with our CEO and all of Iowa of how to immediately respond to the shelter-in-place order. And a lot of it was how to keep staff and clients safe and how to start distancing while still doing the work. And I called our CEO afterwards and I said, you know, with all due respect, Friendship Line, this is our chance to shine. This is our chance to grow. This is where we step up. So I want everybody to know that Friendship Line is not paring down, is not closing, is not pausing because of this, but we are growing. We were able to shift to remote work virtually immediately. We had already started that infrastructure of getting people working remote. So there was no interruption to our service at all. Within the first few weeks, we had gotten over 80 of our 150 volunteers back on the lines. And we were able during COVID to do many infrastructure upgrades to support the growth and capacity to move to fully remote. We have integrated a new call center software, over 150 soft phones working remote, and new equipment, computer, technology has been a big piece for us. An overwhelming number of people supporting us both within Iowa, in the community, and volunteers knocking down the door all day, every day. We were able to increase paid staff and also reach people outside of just the Bay Area because commuting is an issue, as we all know, and so able to hire and train people who are not just in the Bay Area. Our call volume increased over 100,000 calls per month. We had multiple callers saying, "This is incredible, I can't believe you're still here." Next slide, please. We have really been able to evolve during this crisis. COVID has helped to shine a light on social isolation and loneliness. It's something we've been addressing for 47 years, but it's something that didn't always have the same weight. We have been able to be there for people to talk, to vent, to support. And many people have really been looking at what are the basics? How do we get people food? How do we get people housing? And they have not been able to address isolation and loneliness. We have had national and regional partners begin looking beyond medical interventions to impact their members' health. And analysis indicates that social isolation and loneliness are key drivers of physical health. And we've all seen kind of a trend towards looking at loneliness in regards to physical health in the last number of years. But COVID really helped shine a light on how important this was, as well as agencies, partners, health providers, realizing that there wasn't a whole lot they could do during shelter in place physically. And so really getting creative about what else they could do. Friendship Line during this time has been recognized as a critical intervention for this crisis. We've been able to get a number of new contracts. A lot of this would not have been possible without our longstanding partnership with Department of Aging and Adult Services in San Francisco. We've been able to partner with a nationwide healthcare provider to pilot Friendship Line for their members. And through this partnership, we've been presented with the opportunity to work with UCSF for evaluation. And we will be testing the impact of Friendship Line on health outcomes in 2021. Next slide. Another entity that has recognized the Friendship Line during this crisis is the California Department of Aging. Our contract with CDA has been able to fund tremendous growth and improvements during the past 10 months, really expanding our targeted services statewide and increasing our capability to serve more people. We were promoted by the governor, area agencies on aging, news, and multiple media outlets. Our increase in call volume has also brought on many first-time callers who we were not able to reach prior to this contract, extended our reach into more rural communities and communities who were not previously reached, those hit hardest by shelter in place and COVID protocols. Next slide. The human impact on social loneliness, isolation, and COVID really making this worse has been profound. Older adults and people with disabilities are facing health risks, increased isolation and loneliness during quarantine more than many of us. Many of us do have a network, and though it has gone mostly virtual, we do have those capabilities. We do have the technology. We do have our social network, and a lot of our callers don't have that. And their connection to their provider, to their senior center, to the small community that they had was all that they had. The need for connection is greater than ever right now. We also acknowledge the callers, the clients, the people who don't fit into the typical boxes. They don't have their family rallying around them. They don't have a tight network of people supporting them. They don't have the senior center reaching out to them via phone call to see how they're doing, because these are folks who don't fit into those boxes due to mental health symptoms, personality traits, other symptoms. These are some of the frequent flyers of emergency rooms. And these are folks who already are a challenge to support. And we have been with them for 47 years, and we continue to support that population as well. Next slide. I want to talk a little bit about some of our callers and read a couple statements about some of our callers. 64-year-old female calling from Alameda County. She lives alone, and she says she's experiencing depression more than ever in her life. She recently mailed a letter to our center with the following message: I appreciate the thoughtfulness, attentive, respectful way that you listen. The way your presence and your patience provides a reminder that I'm not alone on the planet, that I am not alone in shelter in place, even though I am so isolated. You actually listen. You don't try to talk over me. You don't try to tell me what to do. And you don't pry me with too many questions. You let me cry and you don't interrupt. I really don't like it when people interrupt me when I'm crying. Tears are very important for me right now. Talking to you makes such a world of difference. Thank you for what you do. Another caller who I spoke with personally, Mary, she's 89 years old, and she lives in San Francisco. She recently moved in with her sister, who's 95, to help take care of her. Due to COVID and shelter in place, a lot of the resources her sister had access to have gone away. There are so many limited options due to COVID. She's having a really hard time navigating her new neighborhood. She had to leave her friends. She doesn't know the resources available. You know, the bus routes are hard to navigate. The financial assistance is difficult. Calling and leaving messages, trying to navigate what office hours are and trying to navigate through the high call volumes of everyone else in her position trying to get resources. And offices are closed. She can't simply go wait in line. Previously, she relied on our senior center to provide guidance, but this is also closed. She appreciated having the friendship line to call and process this all with. She explored her fear around COVID and getting sick and what that would mean not only for her, but for her sister. And she really talked about the need for social interaction and really just to feel connected. Another caller, a 68-year-old male from Staten Island, New York, said he lives alone and he's single. He suffers from isolation, depression, anxiety, PTSD, and he has currently some severe heart problems. He's feeling extremely isolated, lonely, and alone. When answered the call, he was sobbing. He stated he was scheduled for cardiac surgery, but he was very anxious. He was so afraid he would get COVID while in the hospital. He was not ready to die. He shared that he had been molested by his stepfather when he was young, which brought on depression and PTSD that he had experienced throughout his life. But right now, with everything going on with the isolation and fear he was feeling during COVID, his depression was at an all-time high. He indicated that he was not feeling suicidal at this time. We provided active listening, encouragement, and empathy. He talked for a while, and at the end of the call, he said he felt much better. He was no longer sobbing. He expressed gratitude for somebody caring, and he couldn't believe that there was a service like Friendship Line out there. He assured us he would call back. And one more. Tom is 78, and he lives in Harbor City, Los Angeles. He's a divorced veteran, lives alone with his rescue dog. He has multiple medical issues and depression related to diabetes as well. His family doesn't understand his depression. They tell him to be happy. They tell him to snap out of it. They try to connect with him over Zoom and over the phone, and they can't understand why he doesn't come to the phone and why he doesn't participate. He says he just can't snap out of it. His depression has cost his marriage, and his anxiety is at an all-time high. He's in Section 8 housing, and he's in the process of reapplying, and he calls multiple times to talk about that fear. He cannot navigate the system right now, and he's so afraid that he'll be evicted if he doesn't properly reapply for his housing. He's very grateful for the Friendship Line, and he says, I didn't even know how much I needed this. It feels so good to talk to someone. It feels good to feel connected to another human being. Next slide. Another thing that we really value and we really put at the forefront of what we do, other than our client experience, is our staff and volunteer experience. I want to talk about one of our volunteers, Linda. She's been a Friendship Line volunteer for over 10 years. She's a retired geriatric social worker, and at 83 years old, she recently lost her partner of 50 years. Not only has she been working on the Friendship Line, and this has helped her to connect with the senior population she missed when she retired, it also has helped her form many longtime relationships with other volunteers and callers. She's part of what I call our Monday morning crew, a group of volunteers. They've been together, they communicate with each other, they always know each other's business, they meet with each other outside of their volunteer shifts for lunch, and now in shelter in place, they've formed a ladies' Zoom group, as well as really reached out to each other to support. One of our Monday morning ladies is having severe health issues, and we get weekly updates from this group talking about her, and they have been supporting her through this. A lot of laughter and friendship has been provided. Not only is the impact on our callers far-reaching and profound, we're also proud to serve our volunteers in our community. We encourage our staff and volunteers to take the tools they learn in training and on the friendship line, such as active listening, non-judgmental support, not trying to fix people's problems, but being there with them, being there in their story. If somebody is grieving, being there in that grief. It's a hard thing to do. We want to move them on. Being with somebody in their pain. Taking skills to talk about suicide and to not be afraid to ask a loved one, are you feeling like suicide? Are you thinking about suicide right now? How are you doing? Creating a safety plan with people and fighting the stigma that cripples our ability to affect suicide, ageism, mental health. We encourage our volunteers and staff to take this training into their community, to ask their neighbor, to check in with their family and their friends and ask these questions. Next slide. So just a reminder, we do right now have 2 lines. The toll-free 24/7 hotline is our 800 number. And then for California residents, in partner with CDA, our new number is the 888 number. I'd love to answer any questions that people have.
Well, I'm gonna accept your invitation. Before we move on to our faith panelists, I was wondering if you could drill down on one topic. I listened with great interest to the testimonies of the clients, and that really speaks volumes about the person who is picking up the line. And I'm wondering, in addition to encouraging our faith leaders to encourage their congregants who are in need to call the friendship line, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about volunteer opportunities and training and what your ideal volunteer profile would be.
Yeah, it's a great question. Our volunteer abilities and training abilities have shifted since COVID, and we have been able to move our training online. But as Barney can tell you, and anyone who knows me, we all are better in person. Connection is what binds us to others, and we really miss that hands-on training. Since we have moved to COVID, we have been a little more stringent in our volunteer qualifications. Currently, we are taking people who are attached to a school program with supervision and training and oversight in that realm, as well as folks with extensive experience on other crisis lines in suicide prevention, those with mental health degrees, licenses, medical degrees. And we are right now taking a higher level of volunteer. We do hope to open that up as COVID lightens up to be able to take anyone. The training process is anything from 30 to 100 plus hours. And anyone who's interested in volunteering can email me and I can put you in contact with our volunteer supervisor. We are always looking for volunteers. A lot of the training we do is untraining people. We are all here today. We are all doing what we're doing because we like to help people and we really like to help fix people's problems. If someone is homeless, we want to connect them to as many services as possible to get a roof over their head. That is very different from what the friendship line does. We are not here to fix people's problems. We are here to be with them, to experience that with them for a short moment of time. And in doing so, they feel that they're not alone in the world. And so a lot of our training, though we do a lot of curriculum with the topics I discussed, a lot of it is unlearning that need to make it better for the person that you're talking to and the ability to just sit with them and their emotions.
At different times, Kaushik and I served on the aging Services Commission, DOS Commission.
Yeah.
And the one thing I remember about those meetings is the necessity to be able to provide services in different languages. What do you do for the non-English speaking caller?
Yeah, great question. Right now, we are doing our outbound call service locally in English, Spanish, Cantonese, and Mandarin. And we are very, very excited to announce that we have started this new year off with a 24-hour Spanish inbound friendship line nationwide. So this is something we've been working towards many, many years, and it's a very soft opening. But we will look for more information to come on that. But I'm really proud, especially being part of California community, to be able to announce that.
Thank you, Mia, and don't go anywhere because we're going to have some more questions for you. You on several occasions gave attribution to your CEO, who I believe is on the call with us, my friend and longtime colleague, Tom Briotti. IOA is doing so much work on so many different fronts, and we call you our neighbors because our offices are in the Main Post Chapel, and your newest expansion has been to open a dementia center in the Presidio. You are our neighbors and co-workers, and so we are so grateful to have Tom on the call and Mia as well. It's been the practice in these briefings to welcome a faith panelist who is tangentially related to the work that our featured presenter is doing. We are very, very pleased to have with us and grateful Reverend Trent Thornley, who is both the Executive Director and Director of Clinical Pastoral Education at the San Francisco Night Ministry. He'll tell you a word about the Night Ministry. I will tell you that for over 30 years, the Interfaith Council has been hosting the Interfaith Winter Shelter. And during the Great Recession, when there were budget cuts, in order for us to maintain capacity at St. Mary's, the Night Ministry stepped up and offered its services to be able to augment the staff that we had so we could serve the maximum number of 100 men there. And so we are very, very grateful to the Night Ministry for that. I'm a big fan of the Night Ministry, and I'm a big fan of Reverend Trent Thornley's. So Trent, would you tell us a little bit about the hotline or the helpline that you all have, and feel free to pose some questions to Mia as well.
Sure. Thank you, Michael and Interfaith Council, for inviting the Night Ministry to be part of this conversation. And I just want to thank Mia for that presentation. The impact stories are always really touching to hear, and I really appreciate the work that you've been doing over there. And I can see that you're in it. You tell these things just right from the heart and so easily, and so I can tell it's very integrated in you. And also really appreciated Rabbi Barney's opening. Really was moved by that, especially I think it was Hillel's teaching around not separating from the community in times of struggle. And I'm going to carry that one with me into my day. And I'm also reminded that we're all in this work together, really. We're all in this work together. So I'm very moved and touched to make this connection and appreciating this forum. So San Francisco Night Ministry was founded in 1964. So we've been going since for about a little over 55 years, walking the streets of San Francisco every night. Originally from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m., now till 4 a.m., but continuing to be out on the streets, a presence, not only in the streets, but pre-pandemic in bars, coffee shops, transit stations, etc. Just being a ministry of presence at night. And we paired that ministry of presence with a telephone line, a crisis line that was staffed mainly at the time by church volunteers, remarkably till 6 in the morning. They would come into the office and staff that all night. And one of the unique features of the night ministry was that the volunteer phone counselors could dispatch the on-duty night minister to someone's location in the city to provide support, care, connection, sometimes suicide intervention, whatever the need was in that moment. That service we are undergoing a review of. We're actually undergoing a bit of a reorganization within the night ministry as we move more into a nonprofit structure. I'm actually I'm new in the role of executive director, and the executive director role is new. So this is a big time of transformation for the night ministry, but we are committed to having that part of our legacy renewed and strengthened in the future. So that's one of the differentiators. But the other thing is that we explicitly speak on our care line, which now goes from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. every night, Pacific time. We deal with any topic. We do so many of the same kinds of things that Mia was describing in terms of non-judgmental presence, hopefully not making a nuisance of ourselves, just sort of listening and taking the story and journeying with people. But we also explicitly are open to addressing religious, spiritual, theological needs and questions. And sometimes that's a critical part of the story. I mean, we've had even, we have a long relationship with San Francisco Suicide Prevention, and sometimes they would even call the night ministry and send over a referral because somebody was having so many theological or spiritual struggles with meaning making around their suicide ideation that they thought that extra support and that angle was needed. And so that's something we've been able to offer, and also just even praying with people or meditating with people. We are not there to convert. We are also interfaith, and we're there to support people to connect with their spiritual resources, their spiritual community, their traditions, their practices as best we're able. So that's one of the differentiators, but we have so much in common, actually. When you were talking, Mia, about the warm line and the crisis line, that's something we've also played with a bit. We were always traditionally called a crisis line. We've just recently rebranded, for lack of a better word, to care line. So we are care line, you're a friendship line, and we do also a mix of warm line and crisis line. I think I'm sort of curious about how you're managing those two different types of callers, the sort of chronic need and acute need. And that's something we're working through too. But very much the same story in terms of pivoting very quickly. We were already in the midst of a sort of internal reorganization, and then the pandemic hit, and we've had to move everything online. We've had to move the training online. We've had to move the technology online. We've had to, all of the kinds of things that you were talking about in terms of making this work and actually even expanding this service, this important service in this time of need, were all things that really resonated with what we're experiencing. One of the kind of cool things about this is that now we have volunteers from all over. It's amazing. I mean, we were so just San Francisco and Bay Area, and now we've had a volunteer in Ireland, a volunteer in Hawaii, a volunteer in Texas, another one in New York. I mean, people are just coming on the line, and the volunteers are finding community by coming together to support the callers. And that's really touching too. So we're excited to see where this goes. And we're continuing to even think more creatively about how to use the technology, just lean into the benefits that the technology is giving us, even though we all kind of know probably the downsides of this inability to be in person. So yeah, I think that gives you a little bit of a sense of it. I guess I would just, the other thing I'd want to explore, Mia, I don't know if this is true of the friendship line, but do you talk about explicitly religious things? Let's say a caller does say, hey, look, I want to pray with you, or will you pray with me? Is that something that the Institute on Aging line would do? Just out of curiosity. And then two, I'm curious about, just bringing that connection into the conversation. So it's not just, I think we all know, not just a connection even among humans, but how are we connecting people to the sacred? And maybe those are the same thing in your tradition, and maybe there's also some other way in which that space can also be held, so that we're connecting to those deeper parts that really, if we're open to receiving, do provide what we most deeply need in this moment. And so, so I think some of those are the questions that sort of circulating, just in general about what kind of service you provide in terms of the religious or spiritual connections. I'm very curious about the tension between the warm and the crisis line and how you're working with that. If there is a tension, or how you're doing that internally. And I think that's a good place to start. And so, by the way, I've also given our moderator the hours and the phone number of the San Francisco Night Ministries care line, which is 844-HOPE-4SF, 844-HOPE-4SF, every night, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. Pacific.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I would say there isn't a whole lot of rub between the crisis line and the warm line. When Dr. Arbor started the line, it was to prevent suicide. He realized, working on a typical crisis line, that older adults didn't call the line, and assumed, of course, older adults have a low suicide rate. And when he looked into it, it was just the opposite. They have the highest suicide rate. And when he did research as to why they weren't calling, they reported not liking being accosted with the question of, are you suicidal, right up front. They didn't like that introduction. It didn't build a safe environment. And whether it was due to stigma or fear or judgment, it caused a lot of hangups, and that conversation was over and there was a misconnection. So he really did start it to provide this suicide prevention and intervention for older adults. But what morphed was this warm line, was that this population really wants to have a relationship and have a conversation before ready to dive into a discussion about suicide. And so we don't find that there's a conflict between the two. Everybody is trained in crisis intervention and suicide prevention and safety planning, but a lot of it becomes a conversation. And an enormous amount of our callers have suicide ideation right now. And very, very, very few of them have intent, a plan, or means to carry it out. And people tend to panic around suicide, people who are not as educated as they could be. So they hear somebody say, I'm thinking of suicide, and they call 911 and want to lock them up against their will. Instead of realizing that that's an amazing opportunity for relationship building and to build some trust and to have a conversation. And ultimately, many, 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 many of those people don't require any emergency intervention at all. So I understand the question. We really do not find a conflict between the two.
Yeah, I think we're similar in that respect. I think what I'm hearing you say, which resonates with me on the care line, is that it's actually because of the trusting relationships of the care line that people then do call in crisis. So in some ways, there's a natural extension, like you said, laying the groundwork of those connections provides the space for people to call in times of great distress too. So, but we're also just sort of curious to see how this is going to unfold for us, because we've been called a crisis line for most of our history. So now, yeah, it is a different feel and energy to be a care line, even though that's probably what's been going on for many, many years, to really claim that and own that. So,
Mia, what happens if somebody does call and they've got a theological question? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so one of the things, I touch every single volunteer that comes into our center. And one of the things I say, other than sharing Dr. Arbor's vision and our history and a little of that, is that I am bringing you on for you. I don't want to train you to be me. There's already me, there's one of me, there's enough of me. I don't want to clone. I need what you bring to the table. I need your life experiences. I need your cultural experiences. I need what you bring to the table. And so if religion is a big part of your life, that is what you're bringing to the table. We are very clear that there's no hierarchy between caller and volunteer or staff. And so there is no way that our staff or volunteer are able to assert their beliefs over but if a caller asks to pray, if I'm comfortable with that, that will become a prayer session. If I'm not comfortable with that, our staff and volunteers are trained how to respectfully be silent and to listen, without shutting down what the person is asking for. So just because of those two things, we really are able to connect people, coincidentally or not, with the folks that they need to be with in that moment. And a lot of this, Trent, and you probably experienced this as well, a lot of our volunteers and staff are dealing with the same things we're all dealing with. They're dealing with COVID, with the exhaustion and the overwhelming loneliness of shelter in place. They're trying to grapple with the racism and the political climate that we've been experiencing. And they have to put that aside to be with the caller, no matter where they're coming from, because we really understand that we're talking to humans, and each human deserves that respect and to be seen as a human being. And so it is really quite a heavy job to have to sit and in other people's reality right now that may differ from your own. And so philosophy, religion, none of that is a problem on our line. We ask people to be there for the callers and to bring what they have to the table, as long as it's kindness and compassion.
Thank you. I'm going to break with tradition for just a quick moment. I've never asked a faith panelist a question, but I'm going to ask one of Trent. And I'll preface it this way. Back in the late 1980s, I was the first Greek Orthodox seminarian ever to take clinical pastoral education. I was studying in Boston, and it was an emerging program at Mass General Hospital at the time. And it was exhausting, and it was challenging. And I think it really changed me personally, ministerially. I know that you are the director of CPE for the night ministry. And going back to a question I had asked Mia earlier, how does the CPE program interact with the care line, and what sort of training do your volunteers get? And who is the volunteer who is answering these questions and praying with the folks that call?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, I didn't realize that you had that distinction, Michael. I'd have to hear more about that. Yeah, it's for those who don't know, clinical pastoral education, CPE, is field training for ministers, chaplains. It's kind of like doing your field education hours, like say to get a therapy license, would be the equivalent in the professionalization of chaplaincy and ministry. And most CPE programs are in a hospital context. So you're going into patient rooms and dealing with staff and family to learn the skills and art of spiritual care. The night ministry is pretty unique and innovative in that our ministry setting are the streets of San Francisco and the telephone line, in addition to our community programs as well. And so, yeah, the students come on and they are trained like the other, they go through the regular volunteer training to be on the care line, but then they're getting intensive one-on-one and group experiences and support in their, what we call in the field, pastoral formation, to find out who they are as a spiritual caregiver and how that relates to how they're grounded in their own faith or spiritual traditions. So that's, I think that maybe answers a little bit about what CPE is, but the CPE students are certainly on the line. We also have ordained clergy, rabbis on the night ministry staff. We have students and staff who are in their own spiritual traditions, Buddhists. And so we have those there, people are there available to speak from their own tradition and trained to help support people connect with the sacred of their own understanding. So that's a little bit of our focus. And I'm sure every warm line and care line, we probably actually have a lot of the same people that call both or all these different lines, very familiar sort of community of people that do call. And I think I'm more interested in just how we can all even work together. Again, I feel like we're all in this work together, and it's kind of interesting to even have like a space that's maybe more explicitly spiritual or religious, a space that's more maybe explicitly focused on, say, suicide prevention, or even though we're probably all doing similar things with similar populations. So that's kind of how I conceive of this work.
Thank you both. And just a testimony to your presentations. I've been watching our participants. And usually at the end of the hour, people drop off. We actually had an increase. So that speaks to both the topic and the presenters. I want to thank you both and Rabbi Barney for the incredible presentations that you made. We will be sending out this recording link along with whatever links to resources that our presenters submit to us. So that'll happen by day's end today. And we encourage you to share it with your congregants and your friends and your constituencies. I'd also want to say a very special thank you to the Interfaith Council's Administrative Program Associate, Cynthia Zambucas, my right and my left hand, who helps make all of this so very possible, as well as to the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach Team. We have our own John McKnight, who, in addition to being the Community Partnerships Group Coordinator for the COVID Command Center, is the treasurer of the Interfaith Council Board of Directors, as well as Trey Russell Allen, who is the coordinator of the Virtual Outreach Team. A very special thank you to Alisa Karawala, who's our producer today, and lead Sharon Walton. We are very grateful. We have the A team, and we are very grateful to have you all with us. In lieu of our regularly scheduled Thursday program next week, we would invite you to join us on Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. for a special Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Interfaith service. As many of you know, every year the Interfaith Council for the past decade has been responsible for hosting the MLK Day March and Interfaith Celebration down at Yerba Buena Gardens. Because of COVID restrictions, we can't do that this year, but we would invite you to join us on Monday at 8:30. We'll have Mayor Breed with us, as well as a number of our distinguished colleagues. And it should be a fitting time, especially in the uncertainties that we are living through now, to be together as community to remember the legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and the inspiration he gives us to moving forward. That concludes our program. Again, have a wonderful new year, and thank you again to all who made this day possible. God bless you.